All right, and then I'm admitting people right now.
Welcome, everyone, to the meeting. My name is Sean Spano, and I'm going to be your facilitator this evening, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. We have a few more people on the registration list, and we'll give them a chance to log in and give you all a chance to get your audio and video all set up.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for doing this meeting. Just to let you know, when I logged on, it told me the meeting starts at 7. There was like a little screen, so I don't know if people were there and decided to come back at 7, but just an FYI.
Thank you for that, Jennifer, because I noticed the same thing, and it just flashed up for just a second and then immediately took me into the meeting. But it did say, Adam, the meeting starts at 7.
Gotcha. Thank you for the heads up. We'll make sure to fix that.
Yeah, I thought I was wrong by half an hour. I just called in.
Oh, good. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so and we'll give it just a couple more minutes because we did have a few more people on the did register for tonight's meeting. Okay, Adam, anybody else in the waiting room?
Nope, I don't see anyone.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And if we do have some folks who come in, we'll get them caught up. So as I mentioned, my name is Sean Spano. I recognize some of you for some of our previous meetings. I am an independent consultant facilitator, and this is the fourth and final meeting for the GESC traffic community meetings. And I'm going to walk us through the agenda here, item number 1, and then walk us through how we'll be spending the next couple hours together. And then we will do introductions before we jump into the meat of the meeting. So we do have one purpose for the meeting tonight, and that is to review and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of the potential solutions for mitigating traffic concerns in the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. And as I mentioned, this is the fourth and final meeting that we've had, and I'll review the prior meetings, but this meeting matches the same format of the June 30th meeting that we had that was in person. This is the Zoom version of that meeting. And we had that exact same purpose on June 30th for the in-person meeting at the library, which was to review the advantages and disadvantages of the solutions. So we'll spend the vast majority of our time working through those solutions, assessing the advantages and disadvantages. We do have a couple meeting ground rules tonight to help facilitate good communication, listening openly to your colleagues, and we have your neighbors. We obviously have the neighbors here from the neighborhood, as well as staff and a traffic engineering consultant. We'll meet in just a moment. So we're listening openly to everyone. We have lots of different perspectives and views, experiences, and expertise. And so we want to learn from everyone. Speaking candidly, we all have perspectives and views here, and we want to hear those perspectives and views. Very important, especially from the neighbors and the neighborhood. That's what we're here for. I'm not going to call on anybody specifically, but it would be great to hear from everyone tonight to maximize participation. It'd be great to hear from all the folks. and be forward focused. I know there's a history with the neighborhood and the city, and it goes back several years. And I don't want to discount that history. I want to acknowledge that history, but we're at a present moment now, and what's the best way to move forward, mitigating traffic concerns in the neighborhood? That's our key format here tonight. So since we're on Zoom, you have a couple different ways to participate. You are free to take yourself off mute, and you can just take yourself off mute and offer your comments. You'll see down below under reactions, if you click on reactions, you can do the raise hand, and that's great. Raise your hand, especially if we have multiple people wanting to speak at the same time. I'll ask you to raise your hand and then we can queue up. So please use that as well. And that you do have the chat function, but the chat function goes just to Adam, who is our Zoom master tonight. And so if you do have any comments or questions, you can direct those to Adam and use the chat function to do that. And again, we're going to be very informal here tonight. We want to hear from everyone, maximizing participation. So take yourself off mute when you're ready to speak, and raise your hand, especially if we have multiple speakers wanting to speak at the same time. Okay, I'll get us going on agenda item number 2 in just a moment, but let's do a quick round of introductions, and we'll start with the community members here. Your name and how long you've lived in the East Side neighborhood. That is assuming you live in the East Side neighborhood. So I'm just going to go off the participant list here. Carol, get us started. Quick introduction. Good to see you again, Carol.
Hi, thank you, Sean. Yeah, I'm Carol Pierce. I live in the Loyola Oaks apartment community at the end of East San Carlos Avenue and Industrial. And I've lived here for 21 years now.
Excellent, very good.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Carol. We'll go to Jennifer.
Hi, I am Jennifer Anderson Rossi. I live on Cherry Street. I've lived here about 6 years.
Excellent, very good. Good to see you again, Jennifer. And then we have the other Jennifer who I believe that's somebody else, right? You're not on twice, Jennifer.
No, I'm not on twice.
Do we have an introduction from the other participant that is also under Jennifer's name? Okay, not seeing that. We'll just have you here twice, Jennifer. Ken, introduction, please. Are you there, Ken? You can take yourself off mute. Okay, might be having a technical problem, perhaps.
Hello.
Oh, there you are, Ken.
Hi. We've lived here over 36 years. I forgot what you asked us.
Just that's great, Ken. Just your name and how long you've lived in the neighborhood is just great.
Okay, yeah, I participated with the city on projects throughout the 36 years I lived here. But lately I have not.
Very good. Well, welcome to the meeting, and we're glad you're here and able to participate. Tara, introduction, please.
Hi, my name is Tara, and I've lived on Cherry Street for about 16 and a half years, but born and raised in San Carlos my entire life.
Excellent. Very good. Welcome, Tara. And Patty.
Hi, Patty Marsters. I live on Cherry Street. We moved here in '92, and I don't know how many years that makes it. Almost, yeah, 30 years.
30 years. Okay. Nice to see you again, Patty.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Glad you could join us. We'll move over to staff now, and I'll start with Niall. Niall, a quick introduction.
Hey, Sean.
Oh, yes.
Am I showing up on the list? Because I clicked on
Jennifer's link, so I don't know if I'm showing up as a
Okay.
participant.
Yeah, you're showing up here as under Jennifer's name. So it shows Jennifer.
Oh, so I was the second Jennifer.
You were the second Jennifer.
Wow. Oh my God.
Dimitri? Is that
Yeah.
Dimitri? Okay.
Yeah.
Dimitri, what you might be able to do is on the participant list is if you click all the way over, you should be able to, you'll see more come up when you click on to
Rename. I'm gonna rename.
rename. Yes.
Okay, cool. There we go.
Perfect. Excellent. So quick introduction, Dimitri.
Hi. First of all, shout out to Ken Hutton, who's former president of the GEST. So he's a long time resident and someone who has done a lot of work for the community. My name is Dimitri. I'm the current president of the GEST Neighborhood Association, and we're the group that spearheaded the effort to sign up the signatures for the partial street closure proposal.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Dimitri. Okay, let's go to staff and Niall. Quick introduction.
Hello there, I'm Niall Blackburn, Assistant City Manager, and I'm going to be taking myself off camera while I try to type and document all of your thoughts and ideas.
Very good. Stephen.
Good evening, everyone. Stephen Machida, Director of Public Works. Really welcome to you all.
And Grace.
Evening, everyone. I'm Grace Lee, the city engineer. Thanks for coming.
Great. Adam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adam. I'm a sustainability specialist with the city, just helping out on Zoom.
Very good. And Mark.
Good evening. I'm Mark Spencer with WTrans. I'm a traffic engineering consultant. Been retained by the city of San Carlos to assist in this matter and try and move this whole process forward towards some solutions.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, welcome everyone. We can move on to agenda item 2. And so as I've mentioned now a couple different times, there are 4 meetings. There were 4 meetings scheduled. We're at our 4th meeting. The first 2 meetings followed the same format. And what we, as we set up those first 2 meetings, and this is going back to June 21st and June 22nd, we asked the participants, what are the concerns that you have with traffic in the neighborhood? And then we identified the range of possible solutions. And we then carried forward what we heard in meetings 1A and 1B here to meetings 2A, and now we're in meeting 2B. And just a quick summary of the traffic concerns that we heard, that there's an increase in traffic, and the expectation is there will be more traffic as the new development takes hold on the east side. Also, the increase in traffic leads to concerns, very important that we heard, safety concerns. Also concerns around access in and out of the neighborhood, and also noise. And an overall concern that the increase in traffic negatively impacts the residential quality and character of the neighborhood. So those are the concerns we've heard. Then we identified the solutions. And at the last meeting, that would be meeting 2A, we addressed each one of those potential solutions. And we're going to review what we heard at meeting 2A here tonight. And our whole focus tonight is review what we heard on the solutions. What were the advantages and disadvantages that we heard? And then open that up to you all. Are those the advantages and disadvantages that you see? Are there other advantages and disadvantages that we didn't capture at the June 30th meeting? Are there other solutions that we didn't identify, that have not been identified, that we want to put on the list? So we're not starting from scratch here tonight. We're building off what we developed and the comments and input that we received at the last meeting. What we also did at the last meeting, based on what we heard at meetings 1A and 1B, we identified what the 4 goals are for mitigating traffic in the neighborhood. Very important, obviously, at the top of the list, limit cut-through traffic. I know the GESC board is focused on that, and that is obviously a major goal here. Another goal is to slow traffic. Another goal is to increase safety, and another goal is to limit impacts to surrounding streets. So again, these goals came out of meeting 1A and 1B, and this gives us a way to talk about the solutions. Which one of these goals, which one of these solutions meet these goals? Which goals does the solution meet? So you'll see that in the matrix in just a moment. So I'm going to have Niall pull up the solutions matrix. And for those of you who were at the last meeting on June 30th, this is what was on the screen in the library conference room, and Niall was typing in all the comments, advantages, disadvantages, what goal the potential solution satisfies, achieves. And so we'll start with going through each one of the solutions and then reviewing what was talked about on June 30th, and then adding comments on here tonight, validating what was heard, disagreeing what was heard. We don't have to agree with the assessments that were made on June 30th. We don't have to agree. And again, any new items that you want to add on to the list. And that's the last two bullets under agenda item number 3, reviewing the advantages of the solution and then reviewing the disadvantages. So if that all makes sense for folks, Niall, we can call up the solutions matrix and we can get into it and start the meat of the meeting.
I believe I'm sharing it. Are you not seeing it?
What we're seeing now is the agenda.
Oh. Okay. Okay. Can you see it now?
There we go. Perfect. Okay, and so the solutions of those who were at the June 30th meeting will recognize that we organize the solutions in the categories. So you'll see there's a number of solutions that fit under physical changes, and then we'll go down with each one down below. I do want to say that these are not in any particular order. And the partial street closure obviously is a solution. It's on the list, and you'll see that it comes towards the end, and there was no strategy behind that. That's just where it ended up in the queue here. So let's move up and let's just work our way through and review what we heard on June 30th, and then open it up for additional comments here this evening. So one of the solutions is to paint, and in some cases, repaint the crosswalks in the neighborhood. So what is the goal that's addressed? And remember what the 4 goals are. Does it limit cut-through traffic? Does it increase safety? Does it slow traffic? And does it limit impacts to surrounding streets? What the participants said on this item was that it increases safety if you were to paint or repaint the crosswalks. We did also include a category, how easy is this to implement? And easy in terms of time, staff work, and cost, and resources and money. This is a relatively easy solution. And there are mostly, as you can see here, advantages. We didn't hear any disadvantages to this. Reflective paint is highly visible. It functions as a visual cue to drivers. It changes the size of the pedestrian crossing to make it more visible and notify traffic where to stop. So let's just hold right there on painting and repainting crosswalks. Thoughts about that? Does that make sense to you? Are there any disadvantages to this? Does the goal address make sense to you? And we'll just open it up for comment. And you don't have to comment on every one of these, but if you have a view, we'd love to hear it. And just the last thing I'll say before I do open it up, and I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, ultimately, what will come out of this is most likely a package of solutions. So we're not trying to find the right solution or the best solution. What are solutions that can work here for the neighborhood, for the city, and ultimately for the decision makers, city council? So we don't have to choose one, we can choose multiple ones to go forward with. So any thoughts about painting and repainting crosswalks? Any input on that? Any thoughts, anything to add on to what was discussed at the June 30th meeting? Just go ahead and raise your hand or take yourself off mute.
Sean, I have something for that.
Please.
I think it's fine. I think it's slightly orthogonal to the core to the addressing the core issue. The only disadvantage is if we spend money to paint while our roads are in the streets are in the shape that they're in. We had a temporary I forget what you call that stuff that you coat the streets with. The surfacing that was done quite a while ago, and it was supposed to be a temporary resurfacing. So that seal is in pretty bad shape throughout the community.
Okay.
So the only disadvantage is we paint it, and then we're overdue for having the streets resurfaced.
Very good. So the timing would need to be right, that you're resurfacing and then repainting the crosswalks.
Yeah, I think that would be the smarter thing to do.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, and we don't need to spend a lot of time on these unless there's input. Otherwise, we can just work through the list. If what was talked about on the 30th at the last meeting captures your perspectives, your views and input, then that's great. We can just move forward. But again, if you have comments, or I should also say questions, that doesn't make sense to me, or what is that? Let's ask those questions. We've got a lot of experts here on the Zoom call, and we're ready to answer those questions. Another
John?
solution, go ahead.
John, can
Yes,
we
go ahead,
put
Scott.
stuff, can we put stuff in the chat instead of having to talk all the time? For example, in number 3, repaint the crosswalks. I feel it also slows traffic because it's a visual cue to drivers that there's potentially people crossing. So
Perfect,
under the-
yes.
Under the goal addressed would be slow traffic. That's not a
Excellent.
disadvantage. That's a goal addressed.
Yeah, so increases
traffic.
safety and slows traffic, because remember our 4 goals, right? Limits cut through traffic, slow traffic, increase safety, limit impacts to the surrounding streets.
So the question is, if I enter stuff in the chat,
Yes,
will that get into the meeting notes?
yes.
Okay.
We will capture all the comments in the chat, and you'll see when you click on chat, it'll go to Adam, but that's fine because we'll have that as a record and we'll be able to capture that. And thank you, Scott. That does save us from save you from having to speak on every single item.
Hey, Sean, I also have the same request, but it would be actually nice if we could see other people's chat. Because like if we were in an actual meeting, then we would like be able to interact with each other, and on Zoom, the chat kind of is a feature to allow for a conversation to happen more quickly.
Yeah.
Does it have to
Adam,
be unmuted? Is it possible to do that?
Adam,
No,
is it?
it's disabled for the meeting.
It's disabled, and so I guess we can't redo that.
Yeah, go ahead. Anything you put in the chat though, we'll download it if it's a comment, and make sure it's included in these notes and
I would
as we go
suggest that
along,
we
so.
also then to wit on that, when this happens in Zoom, anything that's put in the chat, we can share with everybody who's on the Zoom call. So it's known to everybody, so that it's a more open forum that way. So
Yeah.
by everyone, it can be read and discussed openly within this group.
Yeah, thanks.
This
I
is
would like-
Niall. I kind of agree with Jennifer. I feel like, but at this point, the Zoom has already been set up, and I don't think we can go back and change that. But I know we want to be efficient, but I think because we are a smaller group here, there is a benefit in hearing everyone speak. It feels more like a collaborative forum if everyone speaks up. I think chats are great when there are lots and lots of people, but I think this is a manageable size, and we should all just say what comes to mind.
Great. And please do put your comments in the chat if that is your preference. And then Adam, if it's okay, I'll ask you just to give a quick little summary on on the items that you received in the chat. So we're just transparent, and to Jennifer's point, everybody knows what was put in the chat.
Yeah, no problem.
So
Excellent. Very good.
One thing I might want to add to Scott's comment is particularly if we added some sort of signage along with the repainted crosswalks, that might be useful, or have kids crossing, or some sort of stencil, so cars can see that, and it would hopefully increase their sensitivity to the fact that it's a neighborhood.
Perfect. Those are great comments, because again, it shows us that each one of those options solutions could benefit by having other solutions around it. So we've got the repainting of the crosswalks, and we have some signage there. So this is exactly the kind of thing we're looking to hear this evening. Let's move on to curb ramps. Just real quick, for those who might not know, Stephen, what's a curb ramp?
So the curb ramp, essentially, it's a ADA, or it's a ramp at each of the corners of the sidewalk at each intersection. And the intent there is to provide access for people who may have limited mobility to cross the streets at the various locations. So they go from the sidewalk down the ramp, so they could access the asphalt surface of the street, cross the street, and then get to the other side of the street, use the ramp to kind of ramp up to the balance of the sidewalk. So the intent there is to provide better access or accessibility for people who have limited mobility.
Excellent, very good. So not having to step down off a curb or up onto a sidewalk. What we noted here, given Stephen's description, it does increase safety, especially for those who have disability. And what we didn't see here was that, yes, accessibility for those who have limited mobility. We didn't see any disadvantages to this. And we also noted over here in the notes, and I shouldn't say we, these are the community members who made these comments. It doesn't necessarily reduce speed, and it may not necessarily address the other goals of limiting cut-through traffic, of slowing traffic. And so curb ramps might be a good idea, and it doesn't necessarily address it does not address all of the goals. Patty, comment?
I am following up on the bumps. And I mentioned I didn't like those bumps, but I have noticed that you can have the ramps with the texture around the ramp that shows, that gives unsighted people a clue. But I'm wondering, the problem that I had was the material, the rubberized material that grabs your feet, like cement wouldn't do. So it's not the bumps or the texture, but the material that they use.
Okay.
I don't know if that material is like required. Maybe I didn't want to put it in the chat because if somebody knows, I'd like to know the answer.
That's great.
Thanks.
We do, and we did learn at the last meeting that the bumps are required. The bumps that are on the ramp are required. It's an ADA requirement. The material, Mark, do you know if the material, there's a certain kind of material that is required?
I'm not sure that it's material. There are standards of what can be used. I don't know if it's relegated to just one particular composite or that's used, but the size of the bumps and the placement are definitely prescribed and have been reviewed and vetted and approved for use in order to comply with ADA requirements.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
Excuse me, then we have some ramps already existing that don't have that up-to-date rubberized coating, although they are ramps, and they do have a texture at the edge around the whole segment. So
Yeah, and
maybe we're
actually,
just not up to date. Thanks.
well, I think every city in the area, and I mean like, you know, the entire state, you'll see a variety as ramps get improved, they get improved up to the current standard at that time. So we have a lot of ramps that have like grooves that are put into the concrete. That was a prior standard. There's also different shape, like a wedge shape that's more commonly used now than what we saw previously. And then we have ramps that are just unimproved, and those won't be upgraded until such time as they get replaced or changed or whatever. So there's a variety that are out there. You're absolutely right. And that's just the process that takes, you know, an evolution to get things through the, you know, to upgrading everything.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that. Adam, chat comment, and then we'll go to Carol.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So a couple chat comments. First, a suggestion to add like rainbow stripes or even artwork to the crosswalks, maybe to spruce them up. And that also items, I believe in the referencing the rows in the Excel sheet number 5 and 6, the curb extensions, increase safety and limit cut through traffic. And then, comment about ramps that they don't necessarily address the goals of the outcomes. They would be necessary if people are walking through this way to get to work, but to address the goals, we would suggest not a good option to bring forward to council, the ramps.
Very good.
What is the issue here? I didn't quite get it, and I'd like to fill in ease of implementation.
So as I'm understanding it, the curb ramps do not address limiting cut through traffic or slowing
Oh,
traffic.
yes, I got that. And I think we had also said that in the last meeting, but we just said, hey, it's actually just something else. While we're here, we might as well bring it up. And it is
Correct.
something that increases safety. But I'm getting back to Patty's comment about the rubberized coating. What is the issue with it? That's uncomfortable, or it's a trip hazard, or?
No, as I understand it, that it's not uniform across the city, that some have some kind of material and others have, and other ramps have other kinds of material. And as Mark mentioned, the standards change, and then you need to upgrade based on the new standards. But of course, you're not always in real time here. So you might have some outdated material on your curb ramps that still need to be upgraded.
Okay, thanks. And is that an easy fix generally, Stephen?
Sorry, I needed to mute. You know, it's not something that, I mean, we typically change out the curb ramps when we do any type of street kind of repaving project. You know, there might be a few instances where we might change 1 or 2 of the ramps out, but typically we don't really have a project that just goes around and just changes out curb ramps throughout our city. So it's not necessarily a simple project.
Okay, so maybe
So
I'll.
maybe it's medium, Niall.
Oops. Okay. And let me just add that one last comment that somebody actually suggested we don't bring this idea forward to council.
Very good.
I mean, this is Tara. I was just thinking, I mean, I haven't been a part of the other meetings, but I don't think this is relevant. I think this is a city thing that has to happen in all of San Carlos because it is ADA compliant. And just speaking on Cherry Street, I know we have one at Industrial and Cherry and Old County and Cherry, but we don't have one on Bayport and Cherry at those 4 crosswalks there. But this is something that the city needs to be doing in all of San Carlos because it is ADA compliant. I mean, it's a lawsuit if not. So it shouldn't be just Greater East San Carlos and part of this discussion, I feel, because this is something that must be done by law. So
Very good.
I think, yeah, thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Tara. And then Carol, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And again, just like what Tara said, I know that we're on a topic here that's not really related, but I am a disabled person. I have severe rheumatoid arthritis, and San Carlos Avenue and all the streets around here are very, very difficult to navigate for a disabled person. When I walk with a cane or with a walker, I no longer can take walks up and down my street anymore. And so I just want to say that if you start thinking about the curbs or extensions or anything like that, just sometimes for safety, I guess, they put the sidewalks in, these nice new sidewalks. They look beautiful, but they've allowed cars to park across the sidewalk. Trucks and cars park across the sidewalk all the time now. So please, when you are thinking about the improvements, think about access, not just at the crosswalk, but on the street itself.
Very good.
I
Thank you.
want to second Carol's comment there, because East San Carlos, there were certain decisions made that sort of bumped out the street, and it's not a straight shoot down. You have to cut across. It makes it difficult for the cars. I think it makes it more difficult for pedestrians. But yes, blocking the sidewalk there defeats the purpose of having a sidewalk in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think perhaps that's something that the city could consider, just ticketing people for doing that, to help ease that.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that. I think we're ready to move on. Patty, I'm assuming your hand is up from before. And Jennifer, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, but I just have a process check question.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the last meeting and I had to leave because my kids were really tired, and it was probably nearly 10 o'clock at night. And at that meeting in the beginning, I asked if we could maybe go to the most high leverage things, talk about those first. But we didn't actually get to the high leverage things until it was really late, and people were leaving. So I wonder if there's a way to go through this faster or something, so we can actually talk about at least the thing we put the petition in for at a reasonable hour, or hit the high leverage things first, or if you could share all of the possible things and we could all say what we want to start with or something like that, to kind of include our thoughts into the process in some way, just to
Jennifer, I'm sorry, Jennifer. I think that's a great idea. Where let's look at the highest value items first, because we've spent 20 minutes on the curb ramps.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing, and we should have them. I would argue that. I'd also argue that yes, this should be a citywide project, and it's not specific to the traffic issues necessarily. I think it's a great subject, but why don't we focus on the things that we think will potentially would have the highest value at mitigating the cut through traffic and slowing and increasing safety, and instead of just going through this list, because if it's not in any order, why don't we start from the bottom of the list and go up instead of this way.
Okay, so let me, I think that's makes a whole lot of sense. And I'm going to move us then to look at the goal that is addressed. And so I'm looking at number 4. We have 4 and 5 are curb extensions, which address most of the goals. And so that's where we'll focus our attention, especially on slowing traffic and limiting cut through traffic and increasing safety. There's the other goal of limiting impacts to surrounding streets, but if we have those 3 goals, that's the term that's being used here, that's a high impact solution. So let's stay with those, and we'll only go with those in order that have the most of the goals that are met. And curb extensions meet those, at least 3 of the 4 goals. We've got curb extensions, which are bulb outs. And there's two options here. Might have both options. One is at Bayport, and then that's 4. And then, I'm sorry, 5 on the list. And then 6 curb extensions at McHugh, Hall, Cherry, and Montgomery, closer to Old County. You'll see for both of those, it meets 3 of the 4 goals. They're medium in terms of ease of implementation, and they're similar in terms of advantages and disadvantages. They slow traffic. It makes pedestrian crossing areas shorter, and it can also add short trees and shrubs. There's some landscaping that can be done there. And so that's the same for both of those. And then on the disadvantages, it forces bikes into the streets. It takes away parking, especially on Bayport, on the Bayport 1, and it contributes to the narrower streets in the neighborhood that are already narrow, and that on some streets, traffic isn't considered first, and this might contribute to more congestion. And on the comments, bulb outs can be made safer by making them more visible at night by adding adding some reflectors. There's also a way to do curb out extensions that won't impact parking in the case of Bayport. Locations closer to Old County, which are commercial, put bulb outs past the commercial buildings. So thoughts about these curb extensions, these bulb outs, whether it's on Bayport or on the other streets, McHugh, Hall, Cherry, and Montgomery. And again, meeting 3 of the 4 goals here. Is this
Sean,
go ahead,
yeah,
Dimitri.
one quick thing regarding the curb extensions. I suppose it depends on one's perspective, but I would say contributes to narrower streets that are already narrow. I would say that's an advantage for the purposes of trying to slow the traffic. So I'm not sure that that's a disadvantage. So I'm sure people disagree because there was a discussion about that in the last meeting. But
well, and we can put it in both. It's both.
Yeah.
You know, from one perspective, it's an advantage, and from another perspective, it's a disadvantage.
right, that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, that's good. Jennifer?
Yeah, I don't know about every street, but I believe at Cherry and Industrial, we already have this. And I would guess that maybe there's some other streets, maybe somebody else on the call knows where they are. So my, I guess, suggestion would be to, if we're trying to choose what we might want to recommend to bring forward, choose something that we don't yet already have.
Jennifer?
I would agree too, because Cherry already has it at Industrial and Old County. And even honestly, leaving Cherry to go to Old County, it's hard to see at times because the big trucks and the parking there blocks it. So it's already super narrow when people take the turn even kind of fast too.
So these would be curb extensions at Bayport, okay, to slow down the traffic where the stop signs are, and along Bayport, because what happens on Bayport is people race from, say, Terminal all the way over to East San Carlos or even McHugh in order to get up to past the lights on Old County Road. And
Right.
on Old County Road, these would be curb extensions that would be on our street rather than out into Old County.
That's a really good point, Scott. I think, yeah, they are kind of separate, right? Like the curb extensions at Bayport, and I do have some historical perspective on those extensions that are on Industrial. That was a project that was done quite a while ago. I don't believe there was any community input on it. I mean, it was good that they sort of delineated a crosswalk there, but perhaps what we could look at is improving the design of those curb outs or curb extensions, the bulb outs, at all of those areas. So I think a stack rank thing, that's a harder thing to discuss. But speaking to Scott's other point about the cut through traffic, my wife and I were taking a walk the other night, and someone sped down a Cherry, hit a left on Bayport, and then sped down Montgomery. So people do sort of cut through and use Bayport. So the bulb outs at Bayport could be useful to help slow things down, and could be potentially a place where we could plant trees.
Excellent. Very good. Tara, did you have another comment? Okay, not hearing one. Okay, so curb extensions, the bulb outs, it sounds like there is some potential here for these. Would you say that more valuable, more beneficial at Bayport or on the other streets, or both? The McHugh, Hall, Cherry, and Montgomery?
I think all of the above are potentially interesting. Improving the design of the existing bulb outs belongs in not at the Bayport one, but at the curb extensions at well, I don't know, do we even have that listed, the curb extensions at Old Industrial? I only see Old County.
We don't, that was not mentioned at Industrial. It was just those streets closer to Old County.
Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe we should include both Old County and Industrial.
Yeah.
I don't know what other people think, but it could be because they kind of exist now, but I don't think they're particularly well designed.
That was Steve's idea.
My concern is that there's gonna be an accident at some point coming in or out of our neighborhood. Because when I come in, like if I'm on Old County and I come onto Cherry, there are bulb outs there already. And there is not enough space for 2 cars. But you can't see the cars till you start turning. So
Yeah.
so you're basically gonna sit in the middle of Industrial if somebody's blocking it, and someone's eventually gonna run into somebody there, or the other car, if they're not yet there, tries to move over and make space or pull aside or back up. And the same thing happens with Old County at Cherry, because there's always 1 or 2 large trucks parked at the end of the street. I don't know if there's a bulb out because I can't see it because of the trucks. And again, there's not space for 2 cars. So eventually there's going to definitely be a collision on one side or the other. So my concern about the bulb outs is the safety of the drivers.
Jennifer, I think those are really good points, because I've experienced that same problem where we really have to slow down to turn into our streets if we're trying to be safe, because we know what the issue is. Yes, it definitely occurs on both Industrial and Old County. So maybe here's a proposal is maybe what should we be considering curb outs at Bayport as a higher priority, if we're going to even consider them at all as a mitigation.
And yeah, that makes sense. And I'm also hearing that perhaps on the extensions on the other streets, that it might not increase safety. That's a question mark that Jennifer's raising.
Well,
it might actually
definitely-
decrease safety.
I mean, those of us who know, we all slow down and we're all really cautious. But if we have an influx of a lot of people coming through the neighborhood, they may not approach it in the same way that neighbors would approach it.
Perfect.
I would agree with Jen also, and that's what I was trying to say earlier. We already have them, and it does, it could cause an accident because it's hard to see, and then we know to slow down and you have to wait. But the other thing is we have a couple dips on Bayport, I think it's maybe Montgomery or the one prior, but maybe we put in dips on Bayport and slow the traffic on each one instead of doing the bulb outs, because I know those dips, if you hit them hard enough, they're mess up the bottom of your car, so maybe we'll look at putting those so they don't take up more narrow room on the street on Bayport.
Yeah, and those are the speed bumps, right, Tara?
No, they're the dips, not
Yeah, they're the
bumps.
opposite of a speed bump.
Oh, okay.
Right. So we already have a couple of those on Bayport. So maybe doing those at each intersection, like at Montgomery, Cherry, and Hall, you know what I mean? On
Okay.
those blocks there. Do the dips instead of the bumps, or one or the other, but we already have that. So the things we're talking about, I feel too, we've already done some of this. Maybe it needs to be more, I don't know, but we have all of this in place.
very good.
So
Just
One last thing about the dips, they are not deep enough. I see people really hit those, and they're not deep enough to do damage to the bottom of the cars, so they need to be deeper.
Yeah,
Okay.
good point, Scott.
So Sean, this is Steve.
Yeah.
The dips are not intended to be a kind of inverted speed bump. It's actually for street drainage. So they need to be kind of at kind of the elevation they're at, just so that you could actually drain the street properly. So to make them deeper, or you know, you probably won't be able to drain the street properly.
I
That's
agree
interesting.
with Tara that we do already have some things in place. Maybe it's just accentuating what we have in place, like putting up signage by the little divots that say 15 miles an hour, you know, divot, whatever. I don't know. There's probably some sign that might accompany that would let people know about it, because I think it depends how fast you're driving, because I think some people do hurt their cars on those divots. Or at least it sounds like the bottom of their car scrapes, you know, when they hit it. But most of us who live in the neighborhood know what the divots are going to do, and we slow down.
And
But-
maybe since it is for drainage, maybe on the ones that don't have the divots, then we put the speed bumps, you know, the over curve ones, and do simultaneously, because then the drainage is obviously needed for a reason. We are in a flood zone, and we do. And so then the speed bumps can go on the other streets and alternate.
Perfect. Good. That's a great point. And that does segue us. And thank you we have talked about the drainage and as a traffic mitigation, recognizing, as Stephen said, the primary purpose of those, of course, is flood control. But I'm glad we added that on as a potential solution. And then let's go to the speed bumps. And this is got a lot of interest at the June 30th meeting. It does meet 3 of the 4 goals, and it is relatively easy to implement. You'll see under the advantages, the very last sentence, the rubberized speed bumps can be put up relatively quickly and inexpensively. You can design them for bikes and emergency vehicles to go through or around, and there's lots of different versions, you know, flat ones, rounded ones, etc. On the disadvantages, may divert cars to streets that don't have bumps, may be less effective on East San Carlos because it's almost a one-way street. And the perspective was it won't benefit Bayport, Court, or McHugh either. And you would need to apply those equally. Think of the neighborhood as a whole, so they don't divert traffic to streets with no bumps, perhaps the dips, as Tara just mentioned, alternating those. And it's another possible solution that could benefit by also having another tool, as you've mentioned on several of the others, with signage to accompany it. So speed bumps, it got a lot of interest at the last meeting. Anything to add here to what was discussed? Any questions?
Sean, I have something, Sean.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that McHugh stands out as a street that speed bumps, if they were put in, would somehow be, what was the comment you had, that they're not, it wouldn't be useful?
It wouldn't benefit as much.
Yeah, and I think that's probably an individual's opinion, as opposed to, you know, like, because things are cross purposes. If you don't put any speed bumps on McHugh, then you might increase the traffic on McHugh, right?
Yeah.
So if there is a speed bump solution, then it probably should be considered kind of equally amongst all of the streets.
Yes.
In order to receive that benefit. So, like, you know, cherry picking, not to pick on Cherry Street, yeah, what streets get it and what don't could have some unintended consequences.
Exactly.
So that's just my quick thing. But what I don't see is on here is we would need multiple like one speed bump in the middle of the block, as these are extremely long blocks, would not be helpful. And oftentimes what people do is they speed up, they see the bump, they slow down, and then they speed up again. So we would need, I think, at a very minimum 2 per block.
Yeah.
If not more, if we're trying to slow the traffic, because you don't want to provide that incentive for someone to speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. You have to make it a little harder. So, and there's I suppose that could be viewed as a negative for residents, but I don't think most of us speed through our streets.
Mark, is there an industry standard about distance in between speed bumps? How many on a street, the standard city block?
Yeah, there are standards regarding that, and I think as Dimitri correctly pointed out, there is a challenge because, like stop signs, people will tend to speed up between them, and the issue with speed bumps is actually more challenging in that you've got a number of driveways, and also you can't block hydrants, you can't block red curbs. There's all sorts of things. So getting the spacing is challenging, and you don't want them closer than several hundred feet. Right, so you have to have enough room. Now remember, just for reference, a car is about 25 feet. So if you had speed bumps, you'd probably want them, let's say, 8 car lengths apart, kind of as a minimum, maybe 200 feet. I don't know if San Carlos has a specific standard on this, but generally you want to space them out so that you do have room in there, so that they're not just, it's not just a bump. That's also because of air quality and noise concerns that go with speed bumps. They're very effective. They do discourage traffic, they discourage cut through traffic, they slow down traffic, they have a lot of benefits. You'd have to go through sort of street by street and really poll the neighborhood and say, do you want this on your street? Do you want this in front of your house? And also you have to keep them away from driveways. So imagine if a speed bump, not obviously in front of your driveway, but say right next to it, that turn then becomes kind of a, it's challenging. So the spacing of them is there's an engineering design art form that has to go with that. It can be done, but it just, it adds a level of complexity to it, but not one that can't be overcome.
Very good. Okay, very helpful. We've added on to the speed bump solution. Do we want to talk about number 9, one-way streets? If you could scroll just up a little, one-way streets from Bayport to Old County and Industrial. The sense was at the last meeting, it meets one of the goals. It does limit cut-through traffic, but it doesn't meet any of the other goals. Quick thoughts about one-way streets. And I would also note on the disadvantage, we heard from a couple participants were pretty strongly opposed to this for those reasons indicated there. Inconvenient, creates confusion, congestion, and was not a workable solution for a couple of the participants. So any thoughts real quick on one-way streets, or do we want to move on?
I think we want to stick to the items that have a lot of goals addressed.
Yeah.
Maybe we come back to that one.
It just has the one goal here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, that I completely disagree that it limits cut through traffic. I think it increases cut through traffic.
Yeah, let's move on. Four-way stop signs at all Bayport intersections, and the sense was it would limit cut through traffic, I should say, possibly, and that it does increase safety. It's a medium. There's going to have to be a warrant study that's going to have to be conducted to do that. They're less expensive than bulb outs, but you do have the study that needs to happen, and consider alternating with the water drainage placement. So any thoughts about four-way stop signs? And if it doesn't limit cut through traffic, then I don't think we need to really discuss this in any detail. I'm not hearing anything, so I suggest that we move on unless somebody wants to speak to the stop signs. And then I'm also going to suggest we move on from children playing signs. That does not limit cut through traffic, and it really is a homeowner solution. If the homeowner wants to put up a sign, children playing here, slow down, that's perfectly within their rights to do it. But as it indicates here, it's not enforceable from the city perspective. Lowering speed limits to 15
John?
miles an hour.
John, before you move on from children playing signs.
Go ahead,
I
Scott.
think that will potentially impact cut-through traffic, because I think it's important that people who start to come down the street see that there are children playing, and if they are forced to slow down because children are playing in the street, then they will potentially not come down that street again, because they'll know that it's actually not quicker, it's actually going to be slower. And so that's the reason people do cut through traffic, is because it's actually, they're trying to go a faster route, not necessarily for anything else. They're trying to cut through because they can get somewhere faster.
Got it. Stephen
Scott?
is,
Can I interject there? Scott,
Go
are you
ahead,
saying that this, official city signage of kids playing would be effective as, I mean, I think, a bunch of kids playing on the street and someone seeing that with that sign, yes, if someone sees the sign and doesn't see anyone on the street, they might just still speed away.
But actually, if you go down Industrial Road to the Alphabet Streets, you see all kinds of creative signs down there, like drive like your children live here, drive like you live here.
Yeah.
Those types of signs actually make a difference. I know I found myself actually slowing down in those areas simply because of the sign.
Yeah, no, really good suggestion. I don't think it's something we should just discount just because it's not necessarily an easily or an enforceable item. Why not let people know that it's a family neighborhood?
great. And Steve,
Just one quick thing. It sounds like this is something we can do without the city's permission. Is that what you were
Absolutely.
saying? So we could do this at
Absolutely.
any point ourselves, buy the signs, put them up, see how it goes.
yes. That's my understanding, Stephen. And does the city even have signage that relates to children playing here or some variation of that?
Sean, I'm not aware that we use that, but maybe I want to have Grace. Grace, are you aware of? We have.
No, it's not a regulatory sign, so we don't use it, but I want to clarify that when neighbors are buying sign to put up, they're putting it up on their property, not right away. So when we're saying that, yeah, you're free to buy signs and put it up, we're talking about your front yard, your property.
Very good.
And not in the street, right?
Not right away.
Okay, so if there were signs that needed to go up in the right of way, that would be put up by the city.
That's correct. And those are usually yellow. It's a standard sign from our manual, our California standard manual.
Right.
So I think that would be the way to do it, because this is not something that the residents can solve easily. I see lots of people with a little, yellow, plastic yellow, kid, right? But they put those out in the street so cars can notice them.
We do that on Cherry Street already when the kids are at play. We do put the signs up.
Right, and what they're saying, what I'm hearing the city say is that's not necessarily legal. I mean, everybody does it, and I think it's fine. But I guess what I'm trying to argue for is, why not have the city put up signs? What's the harm?
Yeah. Very good. So it does stay on the list, and it looks like Grace and Stephen will need to do a little bit of research on whether there are regulatory signs that fit within the code and so forth on children playing here. Very good. Let's leave it on the list. Lower speed limits on to number 13 to 15 miles an hour on residential streets. It does slow traffic. It does increase safety, and it limits impacts to all streets. I don't see it addressing cut-through traffic. That's the only goal it doesn't address. It is difficult because there has to be a lot of study and justification in order to lower speed limits. And the main advantage is it slows traffic. So any thoughts here on lowering the speed limit?
I'd love to see it happen. Yeah, it may be difficult to do, but I don't see the harm in it.
Okay, very good. And that would also, you'll see on the residential streets for item 13, and then on industrial, lowering the speed limit on industrial for item number 14. Same thing, difficult, it will slow traffic and obviously will require the study. Okay, does it, there's nothing else on lowering the speed limit, and we heard Dimitri say it's worth investigation in spite of the difficulty. It's still a viable solution.
I have a comment.
Please go ahead, Ken.
Yes. You know, the lowering of the speed limit depends on the enforcement of the police department, which we have none over on the east side, which I don't want to get into politics here, but whoever did the contract with the sheriff's department, you very rarely see a sheriff's car cruising the area. So you can lower the speed limits all you want, but it's not going to get them to slow down.
Okay.
And as far as the speed limits go, that goes for industrial road too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a traffic route. And so is Old County Road is a traffic route. There's no enforcement. Very rarely do I see a car being pulled over, and I manage a building on Industrial Road right in the middle of Branston and Holly Street. And that's where the speed speeds up. I even let the sheriff's department sit in our parking lot and they don't go after them. So you're not going to get any enforcement on a speed limit. That's about all I have to say about that.
No, that's very good. And you'll see Niall put that into the notes. And without enforcement, then it becomes a disadvantage. It doesn't have the benefits that it should have because of the lack of enforcement, if that's the case. So I'm going to suggest we don't spend any time on item number 15, electronic signs, and also jumping down one to number 17, electronic signs with closures at certain times of day. And what we heard at the last meeting was not liking electronic signs in the neighborhood, and that relates into wanting to maintain the residential quality and character of the neighborhood. So let me make sure I've got that right. Is that the sense of the group here? Moving away from any electronic signs. And number 15, electronic signs posting cars real-time speed, to see the one you're going, 25 or whatever, it tells you what your speed limit is. And then number 17 is our electronic signs with closures at certain times of the day. So is that the sense of the group here? Electronic signs are not really a viable option, just given the quality of the residential quality and character of the neighborhood.
I want to make a comment because I wasn't part of that discussion. I think that if the signs are like what the city did at Holly Street, which I don't think are even kind of like legal signs, I don't even think Holly Street, the width of each of those lanes is legal. I mean, maybe it barely fits. Then yes, I think that's an issue. But if they're designed properly, potentially they could be okay. But I can see why people would not like them if they're gonna like sort of flash something, and someone who lives at or close to the corner, that could be problematic.
Good. So it would depend on how the nature of the electronic sign, and that there's some are going to be more acceptable than others. Using Holly Street as an example of what's acceptable.
Right. But one solution here that potentially, this is through our neighborhood. And again, we're looking at a whole bunch of things other than what the community actually asked for. Electronic signs posting the speed limit on Old County and Industrial could be useful. They don't necessarily have to be right adjacent to our neighborhood, right? But certainly to get people to be a little bit more aware of how fast they're driving on those streets could be useful, but that's not a solution on our street.
Yeah, and as you said, that was Old County and Industrial.
Yes, and the criteria with that would also we'd need enforcement.
Of
So
course.
just putting signs up doesn't really do anything because people use it to test how fast they're going. And they speed up sometimes to see if their speedometer is matching the sign. So as long as there is police enforcement along with those signs, that would be great. And as long as it's only on Old County and Industrial and not in the neighborhood,
perfect.
That's something to consider.
Good.
I would agree with that also because the kids do have to cross Industrial, or I'm sorry, they do have to cross Old County to get to school. So as far as safety and people speeding, I think it's really critical because kids do walk along Old County, to get through the train station or through the underpass at Arroyo. So I think having speed limits or electronic ones are critical, especially for the safety for the children.
Perfect. Okay.
Because we do have to cross to get to school,
Good.
Yeah,
So
I want to add to that point just really quickly because of the narrowing of the street on Industrial, the speed limit does go down. I don't think it goes down quite enough, but by that, crossing to get through to the train station. So I think, that multi-pronged approach would be really, really useful, which is, hey, we've lowered the speed limit and, you're not there. You're not doing it. Could be a really useful thing that currently is not in place.
Okay, so great. So we've got a new solution on the electronic signs at Old County and Industrial and not within the residential streets in the neighborhood. And it sounds like there's some interest in that and that could work. We do have item number 17 here, limit turns at critical times and locations with signs. You can't make a left-hand turn from whatever the commute time is, morning commute, 8 to 10, or afternoon commute, 3 to 7, or whatever it is. And it does limit cut-through traffic. Not sure addressed any of the other goals. It is medium in terms of difficulty. And the key thing, it does limit cut-through traffic. Most people follow the signs. We're back to enforcement again, because enforcement would have to come into play there. And that's part of the disadvantages there. And of course, people are free to ignore the signs, and that's where the enforcement comes in. And the comments, the notes there that Niall has circled, it really has to do with being very clear about picking the times of day, and there would need to be study done of that, of course. But where would the limiting the turns be, and what time of day? So that would need research and analysis. So thoughts about that? Limiting turns at critical times and locations with signs.
I think it would be really important if you're going to limit turns, then you should limit turns in either direction.
Okay.
Right? Rather than just in one place, no left turn, and in another place, no right turn. Make it really simple and say no turns into the neighborhood from, say, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Things like that. Now that should be up under the limit terms and not, maybe you're doing that.
Yeah.
Looks like you're doing it under the electronic
Yeah.
sign.
I'll get it down. I'll correct it in a second.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
And in the morning and in the afternoon during commute times. Make it the same as the what's on the freeway for carpools.
Right.
I think that's 7 a.m. right? Yeah.
I will add on that. I know last time we talked about how people don't follow signs, but I usually follow signs, which is probably why I'm at your meeting. But at Home Depot, there's a sign that says don't turn left. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this sign onto Britain. And I think it's from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or something like that. So and actually follow that. Although I have realized if I go to a different exit by the garden area, I can go any direction I want. Anyways, I think signs could be a good first step. But I think whatever we put on there, it should be really thoughtful. I agree with Scott that we should be really thoughtful about the time, and also it seems like signs would be easier to correct. Like if we get it wrong or something, then we could make a new sign. It wouldn't be quite as expensive as some of the other solutions.
Yes, yes. And it is relatively easy to implement there.
Oh, okay. You don't have to do a traffic study or something. You can just.
I don't think so. Stephen, is a traffic study needed to put up limit turn signs?
Sorry, a little trouble unmuting. Mark, do you have a?
Yes, I do have a thought on that.
Okay, go ahead,
So
Mark.
with any type of traffic restriction, any kind of barrier, any kind of turn restriction, you're going to divert traffic into different patterns. So it's either going to stay on a certain road or it's going to take a different route. And so you want to think that through in terms of where do those vehicles go? They don't go away. They're going to wind up going in somewhere else on a different road. So with any, and that goes with almost everything here. If you have speed bumps on one street, does that divert traffic to another street? Perhaps. Similarly with turn restrictions, similarly with half barriers or anything like that, then what's the effect of that on the streets where that traffic then winds up or stays? So you do want to kind of take that through analytically, so you kind of understand what the repercussions are and understand the trade-offs. And again, as I've said with every one of these meetings, and I'll because this is my chance, I'll say it again here, everything is trade-offs. And so there's a plus and there's a minus with every potential solution. And as long as we understand that and present that, then we can talk about that openly and understand just, are these trade-offs that are good, and you get more benefit than not with whatever the solution or the solution package is that goes forward.
Yeah, perfect.
So it
Mark,
requires
I
a
think-
study, but it
I-
doesn't require a warrant study like some of the other ones. So would we say
Right.
ease of implementation might actually be easy versus?
It's easier, like a stop sign, obviously, something like a stop sign or a traffic signal. A traffic control device generally is warranted and has to pass a warrant in order to maintain its safety and its applicability. Whereas turn restrictions do not. The city can implement those. Also, speed changes, or you can't just artificially reduce speed or change a speed limit. That has to go through a process to justify it. But you can do a turn restriction. And then, as long as you understand what the ramifications are, but you can make that at an administrative level or city council level. It's different kind of process.
Very good.
Hey, Mark, a couple of points there. I think, when you're saying we want to divert traffic from certain streets and we want to think about that, I'd say yes, exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is reduce the cut through traffic through the residential neighborhood and get it onto a street like commercial or terminal. I forget the other, those other streets that I think are wider and more suited to handle that type of traffic. So I hear what you're saying, that there are impacts and ramifications. What we're trying to do, the point I'm making is, what we're pointing out is by having either the signage or the partial street closures or whatever, that turns into a positive. It's not a net negative, because what we're doing is we're reducing the cut through traffic through the residential streets and putting them onto arterials, which are more suited for that.
I agree.
And the other thing I will point out, I went over to Terminal, and actually Terminal is wide enough to have vehicles parked on both sides and to still have traffic going in each direction easily. Whereas all of the residential streets and East San Carlos Avenue, you cannot have two-way traffic if cars are parked on both sides. And so we do want to move things to Terminal and Commercial and Branston, because those streets are wide enough for to be collector streets rather than residential streets.
Right, I think that's the whole point of what we're trying to accomplish here. And to not have our residential streets be those be those streets because of, you know, the proximity of where some of the lights are. So we did just to change the subject really quick, we did some type of whatever that additional study to get the light on East San Carlos and Industrial, or was that just, I thought that was just a precondition of the hotel, but that actually required additional study to say we actually need that.
It probably did not, because it was taken down. It was actually there, and then it was taken down while they did the industrial road improvement project, and then it was put back afterwards. So I'm not sure that there was a warrant done for that, because there was initially a light there, and then it was just replaced.
Would someone from the city know, like,
Yeah,
if you take down a light, you don't need to do a warrant again if you put one back?
I believe there's a warrant study. It was a condition of the, it was the Landmark Hotel. Now I forgot what hotel it is now, but before it was called the Landmark Hotel when I was going through entitlement, and it's part of their condition, but there was a warrant study as well that just
Okay.
that light.
Thank
It
you.
was because of the traffic condition that that light came about.
Okay. So it sounds like the limiting the turns at critical locations and times is a viable option here. As I'm understanding it, it has potential benefits, and we should leave it on the list. I'm going to move us on.
I think it does, Sean, but with that same caveat of enforcement. And I've heard Ken and other folks talk about the lack of enforcement. So yeah, we can put some signs up, but if no one's ever gonna, you know, if the cops aren't going to be out there to ticket people, then, you know, it could have limited benefit.
Exactly. And we could say the same about speed limits, right? I mean, the same thing.
Yeah, everything.
All those need that enforcement element.
Yeah, well, they don't want to enforce.
Hang on, I'm gonna.
Okay, I'm going to where we looked at number 18 and we're on to number 19, and I'm thinking we don't need to spend a lot of time on this. No vehicles under, you know, choose your number here, 2 tons, 5 tons on residential streets. The commercial streets obviously would be exempted. It does limit cut through traffic. It slows traffic. It increases safety. It is difficult due to the range of functions, construction. You'll go over to the disadvantages. You've got, you know, delivery trucks, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, for example, and the weight needs to be designated as well. As Mark mentioned at the last meeting, most cars are 2 tons. And so you would need to define the weight, the height, the type as well. And over on the notes section there, tractor trailers at the end of Cherry block the end of the street, which limits the ability to residents to go in and out. Cherry, Montgomery, Hall, and McHugh currently have signs, and I've driven the neighborhood and have seen those signs. Need to indicate truck clearance or tag lines. Jennifer mentioned that about the height and trucks wires. So there would be a height requirement here for this one as well, not just the weight requirement. So thoughts about this potential solution? And and as it indicated, you do have that on a couple of your streets, the weight requirement restriction.
Yeah, it's 3 tons. So
Is
the
it
current
3
sign
tons?
says
Okay.
3 tons.
Okay.
And then another thing I want to correct real quickly. Now, can you go down to number 22? In your notes there, Branston, Terminal Branston and commercial and all of that should also be up under the number 17, maybe.
The limit terms.
Terms.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Good, good.
Thank you.
Okay, so thoughts about limiting weight, and could also expand over to height as well, trucks in the neighborhood.
So a couple of things. I have a pretty good joke, but I'll hold off on that for a second. You know, these are details, right? We have to figure out, you know, what the right thing is. I don't think we need to necessarily solve what the limit is, whether it's 3 tons or 3.5 tons. But that, you know, like, let's not spend our time trying to do the city's work here, and focus on some other things. I do think that if we put every single sign that we need for our community, that we would end up with full street closures. Bada bing, bada boom. Thank you very much.
John, I do think it's important, though, that we address the tractor trailers and the large vehicles that are generally going up and down our street on a regular basis. And so,
Totally agree.
but we
Do you
don't need
think
to do
this?
it here.
Do you think this gets at that, Scott?
I don't know what the solution is, but I think that's probably something better that Grace or Stephen or Mark come up with a solution. But it's something that we've dealt with for, 20, 30 years. And at times, it's really difficult to get in and out of our streets because the loading and unloading of those trucks occurs in the middle of the street, and they will take their time to unload and do things, and people will actually turn around and go back down the street and go out another street because this is impacting their ability to get out. And then people who turn in are stuck, or they have to back out onto Old County Road in order to go somewhere else. And that's a real safety issue.
From your perspective, from the neighbor's perspective, does the signage on Cherry, Montgomery, Hall, and McHugh on limiting the weight of trucks, does it work? Are people self-enforcing themselves?
No.
No, I don't feel it works. I just saw like a giant big rig cut through our street. There are oftentimes deliveries to the neighboring businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, a big truck we do have that Old County Restaurant Supply, which is its own unique issue. But, there'll be a big rig on Terminal, and then they'll decide to cut through our residential streets.
Oh, okay.
So, I don't think it helps. And if we had that, then we would have to have them also, right when the residential streets start along Bayport, to say no trucks. So, it potentially could be useful if they were all placed exactly where they need to be. But currently, I don't think that they are.
There is a sign by Terminal on Bayport. It's on Bayport saying no trucks over 3 tons. So
is there?
even
Okay.
from the industrial area, there's a prohibition that those trucks shouldn't be coming down Bayport already.
They don't pay attention to it.
I mean, even the city didn't
apparently
even know
at the
that.
ends of both ends of all the residential streets.
Yeah. So
And I mean,
think
even the
that-
city didn't even know they were there when we're having this at the city council meeting. I sent pictures to the city council members showing that we already have all of the signage.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tara. I do think that we're looking at putting up, I don't know, a total of 7 to 8 signs per each intersection to account for the issue, and to account for each of the like each use case that creates the conditions on our streets. So that's it's I think we would need street signs on all of them, and I do wonder if that isn't that's just the way to avoid us talking about what we all signed the petition for.
I mean, that's also to Dimitri's point. I mean, everything we've talked about is going to be mute if we can close our streets, because everything we're we're talking about is the safety and, reducing traffic. And we can't do all of these things, have signs all up and down of our blocks, speed bumps, street closures one way coming in, it's just so much time and energy that looking at the next alternative might be good to start talking about.
Yeah, I'd love to start talking about it. I do think that when we put all those signs up, it would be really hard for anyone to get through in and out of our streets, given the number that we need.
And just our neighborhood and how it looks. I mean,
Yes, that's a good point.
If we have all these speed bumps, the kids can't play. And it's a whole point to get out and enjoy your neighborhood and community. And with all of these street signs up and down the block, it's the same house that's going to have all of the signs on the corners. And even when we got the parking signs, for the 2-hour parking limit, I had to call city council years ago because when they came out and did all of the markings for the street signs, they put it in the middle of our houses instead of on the property lines. And it was like, oh, we didn't think about that. Well, if you go to any other neighborhood in San Carlos, it's all on the property lines, not in the middle of the house. So, it's the same houses that are going to have all of these signage or spread up and down the street, and it's not going to be appealing. And then the sidewalks aren't going to be safe for people to walk because there's so much signage. So I think we need to start talking about the next point too.
And before we do that, we also need to include enforcement under this item, because that also would need to be enforced. If there's a weight or height restriction.
I have a comment about that because I'm hearing that we have these signs, we have rules, and it's not being enforced. And one of the things that we heard the police say, at least I think I heard that police chief and Steve has said that the police are not interested in having to enforce new things. Well, it sounds like they're not enforcing old things. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, Patty, I think you make a really good point in that the issue surrounding the partial street closures is, oh, this is an enforcement issue. We can't possibly do it. Yet a lot of the solutions that are being proposed with the signage are all enforcement issues. And so, but times 7, right? So, rather than have a more simpler, elegant solution, we're talking about, throwing band-aids, on a big wound.
And what's being enforced right now is parking. Like they are ticketing residents with parking permits, parking the opposite direction, whatever way you're supposed to go, right? And they're ticketing residents now, or giving warnings when the kids are coming tattling on their,
Let me kind of bring this forward and say, it only took one resident complaining for them to start enforcing the parking in the opposite direction on our streets, okay? And yet we have hundreds of people asking for some enforcement of some of the things that need to be done here. And the police are saying that, and we heard it very clearly from the chief, that they don't want to do any more enforcement because that's going to take more manpower, and that's going to take manpower away from everything else. So with the list of things that we have here right now, we're going to have to do a lot of enforcement, and there's ways that they can do it, but it is going to require enforcement. So when we put up signs, it's not just the cost of the sign. It's going to have to be the cost of enforcing that sign that we need to include.
Right, and with multiple signage, with multiple rules, then it becomes a kind of a alphabet soup of different enforcement issues, which I think may make it really unsustainable. And someone earlier, I thought, brought up a really great point about the sheer number of signs along our residential streets that are needed, and the placement of them is certainly not something that would beautify our community. So I think there are some significant issues with the signage.
Jennifer, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I totally
Sure.
agree with what Scott said about the enforcement and also like noting that in our cost piece, like the costs and benefits. That's
Mhm.
what we're noting. And I also, this probably isn't exactly the right forum, but I just want to say that if we're making lots and lots and lots of development, there is going to be more things that the police will have to enforce, no matter what. So I think that we should choose what's going to suit our neighborhood best and ask for that to be enforced. And I agree with Dimitri. We don't want to ask for 10 things because that's 10 things for the police to enforce rather than keeping it simple. So if we can find a high leverage item that's simple, then let's go with that for the police benefit.
Very good. So I'm going to move us on to street closures, and then we'll have one other one after that on signal lights. So this is the proposal that the GESC board has put forward, and just want to make sure, I know most of you are very, very familiar with that. Is everybody here clear on what that proposal is? Partial street closure at the ends of Hall, Cherry, Montgomery, and McHugh at both Industrial and Old County. Residents can exit on those, but people cannot come into the neighborhood through those streets. So I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on what the proposal is. Any questions about it? Okay. Let's just walk through and hear any additional points that need to be made that were not made at the last meeting. It satisfies, it limits cut-through traffic, it slows traffic, it increases safety. What we heard on the disadvantage was the impacting of the surrounding streets. On the advantages, limits cut through, as we said, slows traffic, increases safety, simpler than menu of several options, as several of you have just said, and that would need to be enforced. And so then on the disadvantages, it's the impact of the surrounding streets. We heard that from a couple participants at the prior 3 meetings, and increases congestion. Not necessary because there's a light on East San Carlos Avenue and there's a hairpin turn from McHugh that slows traffic. Those were a couple other comments that were made. And to include, that's the development that is going forward on the east side, to include that in the conversation. Obviously, that's going to increase traffic. Terminal, and as Scott just mentioned earlier, Terminal, Branson, and Commercial are wide enough as collector streets to have parking on both sides of the streets and 2 lanes of traffic to accommodate the spillover traffic. So anything else to add here that wasn't mentioned at the last meeting that is captured here on this solution?
So I have some comments regarding the street closures, because, you know, as I think about that proposal, I think that it needs to go hand in hand with traffic lights at Terminal, if I have them right, Commercial, Terminal, and Branson, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to train the traffic to use those streets and for them to be they call collectors or whatever, I forget what the technical term is. Mm-hmm. And divert it from the residential areas. And I think if we do that in a thoughtful way, we could also reduce the impact on San Carlos Avenue, because, you know, there's a limited number of businesses there, and San Carlos Avenue is not wide, and the city did these bulb outs for the to have a sidewalk, and then it bulbs out, which makes it kind of like a one-way street. So it's, the intent here is not to increase traffic on East San Carlos. It's really to increase traffic on those wider streets, which could handle it. And by having those lights, then you're encouraging folks to turn. Because right now, with San Carlos Avenue being the only place with a light, that encourages people, if they're on Old County and they're entering the neighborhood, to cut down McHugh. Or if they see the light on East San Carlos, they'll cut down Montgomery or Cherry or Hall, depending on how much traffic there is. So by having the light at Terminal and Branson, and having lights at Terminal, Branson, and Commercial, I think would probably, the warrant study or whatever that's called, it would warrant it given the unprecedented level of development that we are talking about. And I think that, the reason that we came up with this proposal and the reason that we got over 250 signatures from the neighborhood and the reason there's a majority of residents that are supporting this on every street is that we see this coming. We see this unprecedented amount of development. And, by not looking at this, through that holistic lens of this enormous change that's occurring in San Carlos, by spending a whole bunch of time on, 17 different traffic signs, we're sort of, we're missing the forest from the trees a little bit. So it was with a lot of thought and consideration that we did that. It's not a perfect solution. But as the traffic consultant mentioned, there is no perfect solution. It's about where you're diverting traffic to, and are you doing that in a thoughtful way?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's what we attempted to do with the when folks went out and got the signatures. We had thought this through to think how to and actually, if you look at that, the way that's the signs are, blocking it on each side, that was just a suggestion. What the city has in its neighborhood traffic mitigation, program sort of brochure, they have a design that I think is more vetted for how to achieve a partial street closure, right? So, I think Scott had an initial idea of doing it in a certain way, and the fire chief had some issues with that, and that's fine. So we're here to work with the city to come up with a solution that will work with everyone, and to iterate until something really succeeds.
And I just wanted to say, I'm Gina, I'm Dimitri's wife, is that all these signatures that we got up and down our streets, people were signing on for a pilot program. We wanted, the neighbors were upset, with the traffic and the safety, and they felt like, let's try it. Let's see if it works. So just want to say that.
This is Niall Blackburn. I'm relatively new to the city, and I've heard this petition referenced in the past council meeting. I'm sharing it right now. Is this the petition that you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay.
And can I mention one thing?
And can you mention it after I mention it, and then you can maybe correct me. So here is the petition, and it's dated November 21, and the issue is cut through traffic. And then on the back of this sheet, there's this diagram, but it looks like this kind of diagram was put together in November. And then there are not 250 signatures, but 138. And they seem to precede any reference to what's referred to here as cut through traffic. The signatures seem to simply be addressing something called traffic volumes. So I'm not sure all of these people who signed this, and the petition really is just asking us to study something. So, and that's what we're doing. But I don't get the sense from this petition that they were signing up for partial street closures. I think they were saying, we want to address traffic volumes. That's how I interpret being new to the city and looking at the dates and counting the signatures. That's how I interpret this petition.
Okay, so the petition said traffic volumes because we were trying to cover the entire issue of the increase in traffic volumes on our streets. That is essentially cut through traffic, okay? Because we have a set volume already, and this is going to increase the volume. So yes, that is exactly what this was about. One thing that got lost in all of this was the diagram. If you go back to it, the idea was to use the orange water barriers. We were trying to do this in such a way that it would be really inexpensive for the city to do this. And we saw the orange barriers that have been used in the downtown. And we've actually seen that the orange barriers in some cases had wheels underneath them. So they could be moved, but they would have, a little sign in front of them. So the idea was, and when everybody went and there were different people on different streets, every one of them had this diagram and showed it to the person who made this, who signed the document. Okay. So that is what the petition was for. And yes, the dates are a little bit different because different streets were done at different times. And I filled out that last page of the document when we had all the other signatures attached. Okay, so we got everybody to sign everything, and then I filled out that last form. So what the information you don't have is that we had already gone to the Traffic and Circulation Commission once and asked for this, and they told us to go out and fill out the application and come back to them. So that was well over a year ago that we started this whole process. And now we're at the stage where the city's collecting ideas, okay? And so it's taken us a year, actually more than a year at this point, to get to the stage where we've got the city's attention and they're actually doing something about it. And
Isn't it less than a year? Because we're in July and this is from September.
Yes, because we started and went to the Traffic and Circulation Commission over a year ago. And then they told us that we had to come forward with this process, okay? So we had started this over a year ago.
A year before this.
No, a year before now.
Okay. Got
Okay.
it. Thank you.
And so that's sort of the whole process that's been going on.
Okay.
There were a couple of things I was going to say, one of which was maybe an idea to think about is to take Commercial Street and maybe Branston, and to actually make them 2 lanes in each direction and not have parking on the street. And those streets might be wide enough to actually move the traffic from Industrial to Old County. And that would help not have to deal with traffic through the neighborhood, because you're actually making those 2 collector streets wide enough to address more of this traffic.
Okay, very good. So let's capture that point. And then Niall has captured Dimitri's point earlier about streetlights being used in conjunction with the partial street closure. So that adds on to notes for this particular solution. And I did see a couple of hands up. Tara, do you, is your hand up for a new comment?
Yeah.
Perfect,
So-
and then we'll go to Jennifer after you, Tara.
Okay, so I have a couple of things. Like, one is just a process question because I haven't been able to attend any of the other meetings. All of the stuff we previously talked about at this meeting, is that all for pilot or for planning permanent solutions?
It depends.
Ideas.
It would depend on the individual item there.
Okay,
But some of them might be pilot, but some of them, for example, the speed bumps, if you put in the plastic speed bumps, the rubberized ones, that's temporary. And then you will
Okay.
obviously, if you put in a permanent one with asphalt or concrete, it would be more permanent. So it really depends on the option.
Okay, because my whole point is what we're asking for as a community is a pilot program.
Mhm.
So I keep putting on my video because I hate talking to black screens or blank screens. So I'm in education. I'm a first grade teacher. Like I said, I was born and raised in San Carlos. I've spoken to the set meetings. I've emailed city council. I'm actually out of the country right now, but still participating. In education, when we do a pilot, we don't just sit and talk. We actually do the pilot to see if it works, right? We've already done our research. That's what Scott and his team has done. When I was approached to sign the document, I was aware it was for a partial street closure. And that's what I signed for. Coming to this, with the orange barricades that he spoke about, it's nothing is permanent. Like, we are doing this to see what works and what needs to be fixed. So in education, when we pilot a curriculum or pilot a new schedule, it is temporary and we work out the kinks and see what works and what doesn't. Everything is great hypothetically and all of the conversation, but until you actually put it in motion, you don't know what or how it works. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of a program? And I feel that's what we're asking for. We are asking for a pilot. Let's put whatever way we go, let's see if it works. We're not asking for something permanent yet. Obviously, we need to wait until the new development is built. And I would imagine that's how long the pilot would last, starting now, because we are having this issue, and continuing the pilot through when the new buildings are built completely and the structures are in. And then we make a permanent decision. And we work out the kinks as the growth and the development happens. So I think we kind of need to get on that kind of area of thinking. Everything is great hypothetically, but until you put it into action, we don't know what it looks like. So I'm just hoping we can kind of start it and move forward with it and see how it goes. Like the whole parking permit thing years ago, it was a pilot and then it became permanent because we worked out the kinks and things work, right? Maybe they don't get as enforced, but it deters people from parking on our street for too long. So I think we really need to put this into action to see how it works and set a time frame. And, after the development happens and more growth happens, we can see where to go from there.
Very good.
So thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer.
I just wanted to say, I talked to Neil about this at the in-person meeting, and I know Scott clarified everything, but I also went around and collected signatures. So I just wanted to put it on the record that basically that's exactly what I did. I took around the signature page and I showed everybody the drawing and talked to them about the request for a pilot program. So I just want to make sure that that's clear and that it is a part of a process that's been going on for a long time. And I also know that this is not part of your process, but I also would ask for continued collaboration between the neighborhood and the city with this process. So whatever is brought to the city council is also shared with our neighborhood committee in advance so that the team, that it can be a team effort to make sure it's actually going to be something that the neighborhood can get behind. Because I think it's really important at this stage. We've already gone to the circulation committee, I guess, twice, gone to the city council, collected enough signatures to meet the request of the circulation committee. And now we're going through this whole process to talk through all of these details. So I would love to see action taken, like Tara said, in a timeline that's clear and transparent. I know I told you this last time. And then also like continued collaboration, because I feel like this is a positive direction to go between the city and the neighborhood. So thank you for this.
Very good. And Demetra, I see your hand up.
Yeah. So yeah, just to reiterate some of the points, and Niall, that's how you pronounce your first name, Niall. Just so you understand, there, even before what Scott articulated regarding going to the Traffic and Circulation Committee meeting, we had, meetings with Stephen Machida. And we also took part in a pretty long process regarding the East Side visioning, where this issue was brought up and was made one of the main bullet points by City Council to talk about, looking at ways to mitigate the traffic impacts on our community. So that, this is well established, and while I certainly heard what felt like a lot of skepticism about the process by which signatures were collected, I do know that everyone went out with fully explaining what the proposal was. And in previous meetings that you probably were not part of, when we talked about those bollards and certain issues were brought up about them, we said, well, no, that's fine. We can pattern it after the picture that's in the example that's in the neighborhood traffic management, plan for the partial street closure just on one side of the street. Asking the residents to come up with the perfect solution to have all the signatures done in a specific way, to not realize that people have busy schedules and are going to do it at different times on their own schedules to go and gather those signatures, and that the initial proposal, has flaws in it. It's the point is, as Scott mentioned, the quick thought was, hey, these bollards are easy to set up, then we can sort of figure out how to iteratively improve on that. And I think part of the discussions that you did not take part in are, we started with that bollard proposal on each side of the street that was brought up as potentially an issue for fire trucks and the hoses. And then when we said, well, let's use this other proposal that's part of the city's own documentation and plan, that the fire chief said, oh yeah, no, that would work. We could work around that. So it feels like that there's a lot of focus on, infringement of a minor technicality, and saying, well, that isn't what we should do because of, you didn't cross this I or dot this T. Although I think that, the folks who went and gathered the signatures did a really great job explaining what the proposal was. And someone also mentioned that, it was one complaint about a car parking on the wrong side of the street. 20 cop cars come out for enforcement, yet the ongoing issues and the signage that already exists and the other things that are there, people are complaining that there's a lack of enforcement. So there's a perception problem. And we've put a lot of effort, we put a lot of thought into this, and as Tara mentioned, I think Jennifer mentioned, let's start with a pilot program and try something and then iterate until we get it right. So I think that's where we're coming from as a community. And we are trying to come from a place of collaboration and working with the city. But Sean, I know that you want to look forward and look positive, but there are some historical things where there is a certain lack of trust. So we're working really hard to say, hey, here's this collaborative framework. We've done this. We've been to the East Side Visioning meetings. We've done all this work. It's not a thing that just happened, in July or some date that's on one of those sheets of paper. This has been years and years in the making. I just want to make sure everyone understands that.
Very good. Thank you for that.
And and to that point, we're asking for partial, honestly, as a parent of 2 kids, I would love to see a full closure, especially on an industrial, coming from that, how they take the turns, and we're the second house in, they fly, and to even get 2 cars, but we're asking for partial. At one of the city council meetings I attended, they talked about the garbage trucks and how that's hard to maneuver. And You know, if it's a partial, they can still get out either way. If the residents can get out, the garbage trucks can get out, right? And the police can get in, the fire can get in, if the residents can still get out. It's not a full closure. And everything's a process and a pilot. You know, I remember on Howard when the roundabouts went in, they were too big for the fire trucks to get through, and then they got shrunk smaller, you know, and that was more of a permanent solution than a temporary solution. Laurel Street, you know, all of those street closures was a pilot program, and, you know, there's been benefits and hardships for people, but we've had collaborative conversations, and I think that's what our community is asking for. I feel like this pilot program is like the best scenario out of all the ones we've discussed tonight, and nothing is permanent, right? Like we can go either way and see how it works. So I just hope we can continue moving forward and get a timeline before, you know, these kids are older too. It is for the safety of them and our neighborhood. So I appreciate your time and all your energy on this. So thank you.
Hey, Taro, can I add to that? You know, what we don't have here, I did propose the solution for the full street closures, given that the city has some potential plan for making industrial a one-way road, which would then provide the space to be able to do like a full, you know, turnaround by industrial. So, and I don't see that listed as a potential solution. You know, that would be our fallback to the
Number
partial
28,
closure.
Dimitri, it's
Oh.
number 28.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, and that I think that is it's somewhere in a plan, but it has not been formally adopted by council. That is,
And I think-
changing industrial to one lane in each direction.
And I think this benefits, it's like, you know, like we meet in the middle, right? Like ideally as a parent, I would want personally a full street closure, but I'm willing to even take a half street partial closure. And I think that's what we're just asking for as a community. And it still benefits the city because everybody could get in and out. It's just all of these outsiders that don't live in our neighborhood and, you know, trying to get home to their own neighborhoods.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to start moving towards wrap up here, and I see Stephen's hand up. I'm just going to make one comment as your outside, a neutral facilitator. My way of understanding the way city government works is it's the combination of what is administratively feasible, what can be done given regulation, given resources, given staffing, what can staff do? And that has to be married to what is politically acceptable. And the ultimate decision makers here, of course, are city council. And so what we're doing here is we are not doing a political community meeting here and what is politically acceptable. We're trying to find out what is administratively feasible given rules, regulations, and staffing and resources and all of that. And so that's where we're at here. And I understand it's very clear that this is a pilot program, but even a pilot program, it has to go forward following city processes on what that pilot program is. And the city has to make sure that whatever they do, any of these solutions, that it is feasible, safe, within regulation, etc. So I want to just say that, and then Stephen, I'm going to let me turn it over to Stephen, and then we're going to move towards wrap up here, and then what the next steps are. Go ahead, Stephen.
Okay. So thank you, Sean. So that's kind of the sentiment I wanted to kind of share as well. But first of all, I just really wanted to say I really thank you for all your comments. You know, I think I've heard a lot of some things that are relatively new, some things I had heard before, but kind of getting back, you know, I know Tara had brought up, you know, we're just looking for a pilot because typically pilots are, you know, you implement and you kind of learn from them. And you know, I do enjoy, you know, putting into place certain pilot improvements. However, you know, I also, as Sean had mentioned, I also have to be very cautious and concerned whenever we do add, in this instance, like a partial closure. I do need to make sure that we do address public safety, police and fire. And that's one of the reasons why we invited both police chiefs, or the police chief and the fire chief, to the TNC. And as Dimitri and Scott had pointed out, originally we were looking at the orange water barriers until, actually I learned at that time that the fire chief, he really doesn't like those orange barriers because of just the way they need to set up their trucks, and then the hose pools where they have to connect to the local hydrants. So we did come up with a alternate that kind of a, if you will, for lack of a better term, kind of a bulb out, where we could possibly have a paved surface, or as Scott had indicated in a prior meeting, perhaps that could be an area that you could plant a street tree. But and I'm certainly hearing what all the neighbors had said about the petitions and signing, and why what the reasons why you want that partial closures. But I also needed to kind of investigate some of the other services that are going to be provided to the neighborhood, mainly the trash, refuse, solid waste pickups, and how that would be affected their routes, if you will. How are we going to handle the street sweepers and any delivery trucks that might come about? So this is one of the reasons why I shared those concerns. So whatever improvements we put in the street right away, or in the city right away, I have to be very cautious that I believe it is safe. Number one, it's going to be functional, and it really serves its purpose. And so that's the reason why we really are having this discussion. And I think Mark had alluded to, in many instances, we may not find the perfect solution, or we may need to have several different solutions to make it work. And so that's the reason, one of the reasons why we kind of going through this entire list of 28 items, to kind of look at the pros and cons and what would be acceptable for the community. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that, it's not that I'm reluctant to do any type of pilot program, but I just need to be very cautious that whatever we implement is, number one, is going to be safe and really serves a purpose, not only for the community, but also for, the greater community at large. And it is really functional. So that's pretty much all I wanted to kind of add. So thank you.
And Stephen, is it possible on this solution here, is a study needed? Is a warrant study needed? Something along those lines before you can do a partial street closure?
It's probably really not a warrant study, but really we probably need to really understand kind of the traffic patterns and what it would create. I know, we in one of the prior 3 meetings, we had heard from a business, or actually a couple businesses, they had some concerns that if in fact we do a partial closures on the residential street, that essentially would make, I think in his words, make terminal El Camino Real. So, that is a concern that, granted, we don't really want other traffic to go down residential streets, but at the same time, we also have to look at, how is it going to impact other streets that that are in that neighborhood as well. So, so this is what I really need to look at, and that's one of the reasons why, we're having discussions with Grace as well as Mark to see what options are available and what are some of the solutions that can be done.
Very good. Okay, we are a couple minutes past our stop deadline here of 8:30, but let's take a few more comments and then we'll wrap it up. Let's go to Tara. I see Tara's hand up, Jennifer and Scott. Tara?
I just had a question, because during the pandemic, like Redwood City had all of those, just what are they called? The orange and white signs, the barricade signs up, and they were all doing like safe streets and closed streets. And like, even if we start with something like that, like how were they all in other cities able to get all of those done during the pandemic, you know, to keep the residential streets safe. And some of them are still up. And there was no petitions or anything like that, I would imagine. So can we do something like that to initially start, like, and start studying it and see how it goes, and then add a partial barrier as a pilot program? Because other cities have done it. So I don't understand like the resistance and the difficulty. You know, it said no through traffic except to residents. And if we put one on Old County and one on Industrial for all of the streets we're asking for to pilot or test it out, I don't see the harm in that.
So Sean, you know, I believe I'm not certain, but I believe, you know, many of those communities, I think Redwood City is one of them, but I think other cities that have had, I'm not sure what they call it. I think they might call it Slow Streets program. It was based on kind of the governor's act for, you know, COVID about, you know, not having to kind of address some of the environmental concerns about closing streets. And so, you know, that's essentially what Laurel Street is currently now. I think the concern by closing the streets, you know, as you suggest, even a partial, if it's not a particular special event, you know, there's some issues as it relates to kind of, you know, we're essentially changing the pattern of the street and affecting kind of the circulation element of the general plan. So there's a little bit more effort as far as you know, closing a street down for such a program.
Yeah, Steve, I'll just jump in here for a second.
Sure.
So you're right in during the pandemic, those were selected streets or street segments that were done as part of a slow street program, but they weren't on the same scale. So the difference here, and this is what kind of makes this kind of an interesting project, is that you're talking about the entire neighborhood, cordoning off the neighborhood with the partial closures. So you're talking, I think, about a series of 8 partial closures, which means that without the traffic signals, which won't be warranted under existing conditions, you would have traffic on East San Carlos and on Terminal directed towards Bayport. And then from there, it kind of funnels into the neighborhood and then back towards the streets. You would have to just say, okay, that's the effect. That's the redistribution of people coming into the neighborhood. And that would be analyzed in terms of how much, you know, the pluses and minuses, you know, of traffic would be on each of those streets. It is a change in somewhat in terms of general plan functionality, perhaps for Bayport more than Terminal, picking up sort of as a major trunk line to capture all that. And it does also require police, fire, trash, also enforcement, because what you want to make sure is that no one is turning into those streets during those designated hours. They're only turning out. So you'll wind up ticketing people who are coming in, which means the neighbors are going to have to accept that and go with that. So the whole program kind of has all of these layers to it. What Dimitri was saying earlier, in that you have an increase in effectiveness if you start saying, well, let's direct people to Commercial or Branson, and if we can qualify, if you can warrant those streets with traffic signals and really direct people who want to get across on those streets, then it takes pressure off East San Carlos and changes that pattern a little bit. The issue is you just can't put up the traffic signals right away until you can actually warrant them in terms of volumes, which, you know, certainly you wouldn't, I don't think you'd do that now because it wouldn't trigger the test for the warrants. But it's so the package coming forward for the pilot program has to sort of play all of these things out and then bring it back and say, okay, do we have the 50% plus one of the neighborhood and, you know, all of the residents and the business owners agreeing that this is the right package going forward, and then the council signs off on it. So generally these things are iterative, and that's what the pilot program will be. It'll be an iterative proposal coming forward that comes back to the neighbors before it goes to council, so that, you know, the neighbors have a chance to provide input and say, yeah, this is what we want as our pilot program. This is going to work. in terms of what we want to try out, and we've got the support for it. So that's the city's process, and that's what, you know, goes forward here. It's not, you can't just automatically just do that. And the COVID regulations don't apply anymore, but also not on this scale.
Very good. Thank you for that, Mark. We have Jennifer and Scott and then Dimitri. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I think I have more of a question, again, a process question for the city. The East Side Vision process. There is a East Side Vision plan that a lot of people put a lot of time and money into. And it didn't seem like there were any studies done whatsoever in that planning process. And people kind of planned, it seemed perhaps more aesthetically and sort of like vision of how they would love the area to be. Now, the city adopted that plan, including mitigating traffic for our neighborhood and all the things that we're talking about right now that we brought to you to ask for help with. And does that mean that that vision process or that plan isn't actually going to happen because every single part would then need to be done a study on? Or how does that plan intersect with this work that we're doing right now?
The East Side Vision Plan.
Correct, yes. Because like one of the items on that plan was to make industrial 1 lane in each direction. What I just heard somebody say was that that might not actually happen because the city has to actually do work to make that happen. So I guess what I'm asking is that a plan that's meant to be put in place, or, and also where does that intersect with this traffic, essentially the petition that we put forward for partial street closures, that we're now doing this other process to try to talk about different ways to mitigate the traffic. How does that intersect with that plan that also said that the city would plan for mitigating for traffic for us?
I can take a stab at that. So the vision plan is an overarching, it's exactly what it's saying, a vision. It didn't do technical studies behind it, which is different from a specific plan, which has an EIRs. It did some environmental study and traffic study. So the plan is a vision that guides our approach and thinking. But in order to implement the plan, each element needs to go through its own needed study. And so it's not only if it's, if traffic study is needed, then it has to go through traffic study. If warrants are needed, it has to go to warrant study. And it also needs environmental study. So so the vision plan is definitely an overarching guideline. And in each, in order to implement the elements of the plan, you need further studying.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And just to reiterate or add on to that, so as Grace is saying, it's a vision that the council has adopted. They adopted the East Side Vision. This is our vision, but they did not approve any of the specific elements. As Grace is saying, those still need to be developed, researched, put into proposal form, and then council has to approve those. So council's just improved the overarching vision and not any of the specifics within the vision. Scott, you're up, and then we'll go to Dimitri.
Hi. Okay, so I want to make a correction to number 21 to start with at the beginning. So the signals.
Sorry, hold on. Sorry.
That's okay. The signals that we'd like, the streets we'd like signals are at Terminal and Industrial.
Signals at Commercial Street and Terminal at intersections with Industrial and Old County.
Right. The ones that, so I've gone and looked at it now, and I can actually tell you the intersections that we're asking for signals. On Industrial Road, we'd like one at Terminal.
Okay.
And on Old County Road, we'd like one at Terminal, Branston, and Commercial. And I think some of those are planned already through the Alexandria project. But those are the those are the ones that when we were talking about additional signal lights,
Yeah.
those are the ones we were talking about.
Very good.
Okay. The second thing is under number 22, under disadvantages. I want to make it perfectly clear that there was only one family or one household that talked about increased congestion and it not being necessary to have street closures on McHugh. So where it starts increased congestion, from that point on, that was all one individual.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
And there's a whole bunch of people who signed that petition, and I don't want to lose that.
Okay,
Okay. And then the one household, you can even put one household
okay, that's fine.
or one person's comment. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the whole pilot program and petition process. And I think that it would be great if we went back and looked at that in the neighborhood traffic mitigation plan and sort of set some expectations for people, because I think the neighborhood's expectations of what they were expecting out of the neighborhood traffic mitigation process are different than what the city's expectations were when a pilot program or a petition is requested. And I think a lot of the frustration that is occurring amongst individuals in the neighborhood could be avoided if there were a sort of a flow chart type process of this is how you do this, this is what happens next, this is, and so.
Don't sign your paper too late.
So, just trying to clarify expectations up front may make it a lot easier for the residents to understand and for staff to not be put in the position of feeling frustration from the neighbors.
Okay, I
Okay.
appreciate that. And this is the traffic
Traffic
mitigation
mitigation.
process?
It's the neighborhood traffic mitigation process. Is that right, Stephen?
Yes.
Okay.
Neighborhood traffic management.
Yes,
Traffic management.
management plan. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
thank you, Scott.
Very good. Dimitri.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, a couple of things in the list of solutions, if we could go back to that. Under street closures, the full cul-de-sac should be in that section and not in other, because that's another potential street closure idea. So the create cul-de-sacs at end of each street at industrial should.
Oh, which, can you give me a line item? Oh, here, this
The
one,
last-
number
the last
28.
one, yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so that and alternating one-way streets was already up higher, so we don't really need it twice, but it doesn't achieve any of the goals. But so I think the cul-de-sac should be part of, like, hey, there are two proposals for street closures, a partial cul-de-sac and a full cul-de-sac on industrial.
All
If
right,
that makes sense.
I think this one, they thought that it would only be effective if industrial were in fact to be made one lane in each direction.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that
and that's
was a
fine.
big contingency there. Okay.
Yeah, no, and we understand that. But barring a partial street closure, then we might support the one lane on industrial. We presented that as an alternative. Now, we self-edited as a community to say, well, we're not sure if that really should be the first thing that we would ask for. Then, boy, there were so many comments that were made. Trying to really think through the final points that I wanted to discuss. So there are a couple of things, sort of cognitive disconnects that I wanted to ask about and address. So in downtown, as we know, plastic bollards are being used. We have full street closures in some cases, and maybe some of them are partial to allow bikes and stuff and pedestrians to walk through. And that was made possible, and that was in ostensibly a far more heavily trafficked area. So that was possible to achieve, to at least try it. So when there's a will, there's a way. And so I think there's a cognitive disconnect, at least within the community, to say, oh, it's okay here, but not there, right? So that's just an observation and a point. When it comes to, we need to look at all of the alternatives and all that, and really study stuff. I completely appreciate that and understand that. But I don't see that same level of effort and concern when we're talking about new development, particularly when it pertains to how traffic gets impacted. We have two major developments that are being planned that only have one entrance and one exit point through one driveway each, that are right by a major freeway intersection. And there's been no discussion about that and how that could be a problem. And I'm not aware of the police and fire chief, doing studies on that particular proposal, which is, I think, significantly more has significantly more safety issues and concerns there. So again, that's another sort of like cognitive disconnect that at least I have, and how these things are approached. So it's possible to do in downtown. It's possible to ignore for new development, but when the residents are asking for something, there are a number of hoops and hurdles. I understand that we need them, but it feels somewhat disproportionate. That whole comment of, it takes one person to complain about one thing, and all of a sudden, there's all this enforcement for a specific type of issue. It's the consistency that I'm looking for. If we have processes, let's make them consistent across the board. If we're studying traffic, let's study traffic in a way that is consistent across the board. So that's just one point. And then the final point, the traffic consultant, I'm sorry, I'm spacing on your name, but you mentioned that if we do the partial street closures, somehow that's gonna greatly increase the traffic on Bayport, and I'm not quite grokking why.
Instead of having folks who are turning into the local streets on and off of Old County or Industrial, they're going to be routed to a street where they can make a turn into the neighborhood, which means they're going to come in, let's say on Terminal or East San Carlos, and then to get to their street, they're likely to wind up on, Bayport is the major north-south roadway before they turn back towards, or they'll use a different street, but I think Bayport is very likely to capture more of that before it returns back to one of the
Right. Thank you. Yeah,
it's the
thank you.
rerouting.
So I wanted to discuss that a little bit, because we're talking about 3 to 4 blocks. And we're also talking about when you're going in one direction, you enter east, let's take East San Carlos as you're going south, you hit a left onto East San Carlos Avenue where the light is, and then you hit the left to go to McHugh. You're not impacting anyone on Bayport, because there's the home on the corner, which would receive that same traffic if they had gone down McHugh. And so if you look at that, and I'd be happy to take this offline, I don't really see that there's some significant increase in the neighborhood traffic due to this proposal, because of the fact that the houses on Bayport are on the corner, and they're going to get that traffic whether it comes down, McHugh or Montgomery, or Cherry, or if that car is going to Bayport to their street, and there are multiple streets that would allow the ingress, which would mitigate that impact. So I think it's a wash. I think it would end up being a wash. So that's my comment there. So I mean, it looks like it's this huge amount of stuff, right? But we're really talking about Montgomery, Cherry, and Hall. And then McHugh is on the other side of East San Carlos. So I don't see that this is some kind of giant thing. What's happening now is someone will go down Old County, hit a right on Hall, bang a left on Bayport, speeding, hit a right on Montgomery, and then hit a left on Industrial, right? And we're trying to avoid that type of thing by not allowing people into the neighborhood who do that. So when we make it difficult for people to come in, I don't see how that increases traffic on Bayport. It's just the neighborhood traffic that would be utilizing Bayport. Does that make sense?
I understand where you're coming from on it. If you live at the corner of either Old County and Cherry and Hall, or Montgomery, or the same with on the Industrial side, those folks are the most impacted because they have the most circuitous route to get into the neighborhood, because they would have to go around to come back to their house, which is right at that corner. So it is some recirculation for some, and for some it might actually be less. But there is a redistribution of traffic. It doesn't change the total number. And what it does with the folks cutting through, it discourages quite a bit of that. But you could still wind up with people, coming up Old County, making a right on Terminal, up Bay Point, making a right on Montgomery, and exiting, onto Industrial or something. So the cut through patterns change. It does discourage them for sure, but it will also change them for those that will still want to do that and find it beneficial if they perceive a travel time difference. That's what cut through traffic is. It's about perception of travel time.
Right. And
yeah,
like
and Mark,
being a
let
person.
him finish. Let him finish.
Yeah, may I finish my point? So I think those are really great points. And one of the ways we could mitigate that is by having those, the four-way stop signs on that include Bayport, right? So that would discourage the people who are cutting through the neighborhood because, oh, I have to stop on Cherry. Oh, I have to stop on Montgomery. Oh, I have to stop on the street, right? So again, it's like trying to think through that problem, and I appreciate that you brought that up because, hey, if we put our heads together, I think we can come up with something.
And that's the package of solutions where it's not just one thing that works, because you have to sort of take it through to several other items in order to really have the effect that's intended.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay. Jennifer?
I just wanted to add that right now I have a bunch of neighbors that already take Bayport that try to avoid like turning out on Cherry onto Old County, for example. So they go on Cherry, then they go to Bayport, then they go to East San Carlos, they go to the light, and they go out there. So I actually don't think that the impact will be much greater than, I think maybe you're making the assumption that people aren't already doing this, but there are a lot of people who are already using the lights because it's hard to turn out. When I go to the end of Cherry and I try to make a left on Industrial, sometimes
it's not the outbound, it's the inbound. The inbound is what'll change, because you're restricting the inbound. If you have the closures, it restricts the inbound traffic, right?
Yeah,
outbound hasn't changed.
Might or it might not. What I'm trying to say is people are already using these patterns in our neighborhood. The neighbors are. So not everybody, obviously, but there are a lot of people who are already using that, because when you guys put the counters in, some neighbors were like, oh, maybe I should start using Cherry for the counters because I don't use it right now. I try to avoid using it. So I think that it might be a less of an impact than you might making the assumption.
Which would be good if it was. I mean, that would be a positive. Yeah. If you can make a right turn into the neighborhood now, the left turns are very difficult, no question, from either Industrial or Old County. The right turns, of course, right turns are more innocuous than lefts because you don't have to cross over a stream.
It really depends on what street you're turning onto, because Cherry is actually, like I already described, kind of dangerous, and some people avoid turning right onto that street as well. That was my only point. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we have new comments here. Tara?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, being a neighbor at the closer to industrial, I'm only 2 houses in from industrial because we have the therapy place right there. And then the business, and then we're up there. But I wouldn't mind taking the few extra minutes to go around to make it safer for our entire neighborhood. And I know many of us at the end of the block have already had that discussion. And willing to take those couple extra minutes for the safety of our neighborhood. And, you know I work personally, my husband works, and our hours, are during non-commute times, and what's one more minute of our day if we could all kind of try to be a little bit more relaxed and not in a hurry, which is what our goal is, right? Just trying to get to places safely instead of rushing. So being at the end of the block, I would much rather prefer to take that extra 2 minutes to make it safe.
Okay. Patty?
Hello. So that cognitive disconnect that Dimitri was talking about is resonating with me because, you're saying, oh, if we put the partial closures in, it's going to change our traffic. Well, that whole, like one of the women said, people are using East San Carlos to get out, not using their streets to get out and access industrial because of that light. So, but also, since we got ticketed for being in the wrong way and we want to be law abiding, and if they're going to pay attention, then we're going to park the right way, that has changed people's paths, the way they drive in, so that they can be parked on the right side of the street for their house. They don't want to park across the street in front of their neighbor's house. So that changes the way they will come in, enter the neighborhood. And that happened with, that there was no study or warrant issued for that whole thing. Also, maybe we should have just done this a long time ago, and we could have put up the barriers and then found out that the fire department had a problem, because apparently you got those roundabouts, is that true, on Howard that were too big, and after they're put in, the fire department says, that's a mistake, and now we're suffering because you guys didn't do your due diligence before. Okay, thank you. I'm getting tired. Good night.
Okay, very good. I'm guessing we're all getting a little tired. Let's move towards wrapping up here. And so there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of analyzing these solutions on staff's part. And as we've talked about tonight, looking at what a package of solutions look like. And so staff will continue to do their research and analysis, and then they will put forward a series of recommendations to present to council. I am going to encourage the city to circle back with the neighborhood at some point, and in the name of transparency and in the name of collaboration, in the spirit of collaboration that several of you have talked about tonight. I will say that once a staff report is prepared, that staff report is made public and cannot be shared with any group or individual before it's made public, and that's when council receives the staff report. So this circling back with the community would need to take place well before a staff report is compiled. But that is the process going forward. Eventually, there will be a report with recommendations that council will deliberate, discuss, and ultimately vote on in whatever that happens to be. And at this point, several of you have talked about a timeline. And at this point, that the tentative timeline is for the end of October, August, and sometime into September, that this would be presented to council. So those are the next steps in the process. And I do just want to remind everyone here that we have now conducted 4 meetings with the community, with the neighborhood. We've had over 10 hours of meeting time. So, and I understand some of the history with the neighborhood and the city, but from my perspective, the neighborhood is operating out of good faith and coming forward with this proposal and wanting to collaborate. And from my perspective, the city and staff is also operating out of good faith and trying to listen and accommodate the neighborhood as much as it can with what is it within the bounds of what's administratively feasible. So that's where we're at. Stay tuned, and appreciate all your input and the time that you've invested in this. And we'll look forward to next steps as staff does its work and give them a little bit of space and time to do some analysis and research. And then there'll be a circling back at some point.
Hey, Sean, can you just clarify the dates for the council meeting? I think you may have misspoken. I just want to make sure everyone gets it.
There's no date certain. I think
Month.
the time frame is the end of August into September.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. Okay, with that, have a good evening, everyone, and good luck. And I look forward to perhaps meeting with all of you again at some point. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sean.
thank you, Sean.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.